Christian, thank you. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks.
I think you heard that from everybody. We really appreciate your story. I wonder, Winnie, Jay, if you have any thoughts that you would want to respond to what you heard from Christian, just initial responses and reactions.
Well, thank you, Christian, for sharing that modern foot washing story. So I work with Renewal Works, which is a ministry of forward movement which tries to help, and I appreciate you're talking about your own church discerning what God was calling you to do and be, and figuring out what with specificity that was. And what we do is talk with congregations about what it is that contributes to spiritual growth. For most of my ministry, this is my own conversion, for most of my ministry, I thought that spiritual growth was related to the amount of church activity that you did. And those two things went hand in hand. And what we talk about and what I've come to realize is that it really is about the relational piece of how it is we grow in love of God and neighbor. And one of the features of our conversations with churches, and the work is really about stimulating conversations with parishes in a discernment way, what they're doing and being, is to say one of the key elements in spiritual vitality, and we got the language from folks who've been working on this for a long time, and I first didn't like it, but I do like it. I do like it now. They say what we do is pastor the community. And so churches of spiritual health find ways to pastor the community, which is to be present and to come alongside. As Dwight Chiley says, to know what God is up to in the neighborhood. To not assume we're bringing God, to recognize that God is already there and to be present. So I just am so deeply grateful for your witness of what one instance of pastoring the community looks like. And, come in great variety. It's service, it's this version of foot washing, it's advocacy, working for justice and peace, it's interfaith dialogue, it's who knows what it is, but I think we're all called to figure out in our own time and place and space and context what pastoring the community works like. So I'll stop there. But.
Well, I'm from the Diocese of Los Angeles, so I'm just proud right now. It's just amazing. It's such a beautiful ministry. I think one of the challenges in places like Los Angeles and in the suburbs, I grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, is what does it mean to be in the community? I'm in New York right now, and in New York it's really obvious what it means to be in the community. You can go walk around and see your community and you can see need. It's different in Los Angeles to figure out where need actually is, except for the most obvious and pressing. Sort of have found a place where people gather anyway or wish to be, and to find a need that you wouldn't have known about if you weren't in relationship, I think is just beautiful. I'm new to Trinity, so I don't sort of wear the title very well yet. We get to decide what to fund is a lot of what we get to do at Trinity. But I come from the part of the church that tries to figure out how you engage the world around you. And in most of my professional life, we've had a building, and we have to have a building. And the building can't go away for certain reasons. So what does it mean for the building to be the church has been my question, and it's not a church because it has a steeple on it and a bad roof. It's the church if we do something that matters in the community. And I think I'll stop there, but the idea of connecting to the community exactly where it is and finding a need that isn't obvious, I think is just beautiful.
And it's being intentional about that too. In my context in Southern California, it's a car culture. You get out of your house, you get in your car, and you go to you go from A to B. And you don't, unless you are intentional about where you are and who you're with and making time for that, you can not know that there's homeless people or unresourced people in your community if you choose. Then there's lots of people that choose not to know that. And then the people that do realize that, even then, unless you're intentional about it, it's hard to meet somebody. So this space is that.
So all three of you in your roles have an opportunity to see the church from a bit of a different angle than many of us here. We got the middle management types, but we have a lot of people that are really grassroots. They're in a local congregation, and in your roles, you're able to see a little bit more of what's going on across the church. So Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing. Laundry Love is one example of how people are trying to be more intentional about making that connection with their community and their neighbors and those that would typically be invisible maybe to other people. What are some of the other things that you're seeing in the roles that you each serve in very different ways across the church of people being intentional, as you put it?
I wish I wish I could see more. It is there, but one of the things that I realized when I came into a pretty decent-sized parish when I first came into church was like, oh, these are all amazing people, and they're so loving and giving, and but then after a while, I realized this is an army of good, and why are we not out there doing more good as a force, as a community, moving and really with so many hands, changing things. I didn't mean to answer you with the negative, but that's just where my head was at right then.
No, that's fine. I think that's probably a challenge that I would assume many people face is how can we get people out of the pews. And one of the terms that you used early on in your talk was common concern. How do we help our congregations? How do leaders, emerging leaders, how can they help people uncover that common concern in whatever context they find themselves in? What thoughts do you have? Winnie?
I have a lot of feelings about that. We live in a nation that's falling apart. You don't have to look very hard to see that it's falling apart. And it's not about ideology. People are hungry, literally. People can't keep their homes. You literally don't have to think very hard about it. And if the church, the fact that people even ask, and I know it's your job to ask right now, but the people ask what need is in the community and what their church could be doing. It might mean that you need to bring the newspaper into the churches, but I think people engage because leadership gives them permission to engage, and I don't mean ordained leadership. I think people need to stand up in their churches and note what's happening outside of the church. And if you live in a community where immediately outside of your church there's not a lot of suffering, you don't have to go very far to find some. It's not like we're living in a great time where you've got to really stretch yourself to find a little bit of human suffering. It's just not the case. And I can tell you right now, I'm not getting a lot of grant applications that excite me from churches. I'm getting a lot of churches that are used to taking care of themselves and want their clergy to get paid and want more staff to do more work. And I feel like we've really lost our way. When I was at St. Mark's in the Bowery, it's a fabulous church in the East Village that you should visit if you ever get to go to the East Village in New York. I was told it was a career ender to go do a part-time job that really wasn't even paid part-time in a place that had failed for so long that nobody should go there. And instead of going in, as we do in our diocese, with a couple of years of funding to go build up a place, which is how you turn things around, or how it used to be in our diocese, I went in with no funding, with being told basically not to go, to a place that was in the middle of a community in so much need and flux that how could you not have a church that thrived if you cared about the community? And it was a church where we did nothing that was supposed to build up a church. And we did everything that we could think of, and really in shoddy, amateur ways, to be the church in that neighborhood. And the other end actually came, exactly as we're all told it does. And the leaders in the church that didn't want to do it with us didn't have to. We couldn't make them. But I didn't wait for everyone to agree that it was a good idea. And I don't think you've got to be a priest to do that. And I think that at some point, I think what Christian's talking about is what it means to be a Christian in the world. And if you're going to do that in a church, then we've got to act like Christians in the world.
Yeah.
And I would just say, because I lived a couple blocks away from your church, worked in another church, but your witness speaks to the power of leadership in a congregation to make that kind of transformation. So I know that neighborhood, and I know
that great church. I
know that church, how it has been and how it's been transformed. So I do find as I go around that the piece of about leadership is key. And what I've been thinking about as I've heard these several talks is this whole talk about the mission of God, and in a way my own story was it's not that I sort of have a grasp on the mission of God and I'm going to impart it to these poor folks who haven't quite gotten it yet. What I found in my own career as a rector was that I had huge amount of work to do in understanding the mission of God to bring wholeness to my congregation. And the more I got into that, the more I realized I had a lot of spiritual work to do myself about the brokenness and where there was need for wholeness. I think you sort of referenced this, the commitment to be of service, which I think is a key component of spiritual health, actually probably transformed me than it transformed anybody I was helping. But I think that piece for leaders is key, to think about how we are taking Jesus' model and leading communities in that way, because it is about changing us. I think as I go around to churches, I feel like the mission of God needs to come to our churches. And they need to be converted in the ways you're describing. If you can, they need to be changed.
Yeah, one version of that. Oh, sorry.
I'm sympathetic to clergy and leadership, because I know that a lot of parishioners come and say they just found out about hotel families or something like that, and like, we need to be doing something about that. Like, it's always getting.
Which means the rector needs to do something about that.
Yeah, you need to do something. Like,
fix that.
You need to do something about that. And I was like, well, right. What are you going to do about it? Like, that's probably the best response you can give. What are you going to do about it? And but it's about empowering each other too, feeling like you've got the ability and the blessing. I mean, most of y'all are going into the blessing business, and just blessing your people and letting them know that they've got abilities and they can do stuff.
You all knew that, right? That's the business you're going into? Winnie, it sounded like you were going to add something.
One way to translate good news, which has been really fun to do at Trinity and Blessings, is good news to the poor. Like, that's just one way to actually understand that phrase. And I actually think that it's transformative for churches to consider that that's the task. And I agree with you that it's absolutely about self-awareness as well, that we can be really arrogant in saying that we have healing to do, whether that's around justice or outreach or whatever. But I feel like in ministry sites, the site and the community will give you the tools to do the work if you're vulnerable to it, if you can make yourself open to that process. So St. Mark's is full of just iconic stories, and they're exciting because they involve needles and all kinds of horrible things, but full of them. And ministries where you couldn't actually do it yourself, which is the truth of all church work, except that you can disguise it, and especially in suburban places, which is where I come from, it can look like you can do it yourself. But if you go to a place like St. Mark's in the Valley, you just can't do it yourself. And so I remember after Hurricane Sandy, the superstorm, everybody downtown left, and it wasn't an irresponsible thing to do. It was the responsible thing to do. It was really dangerous. The lights were out, the plumbing was out. And it was one of those moments where I had been at St. Mark's for a while, and I knew the right thing to do was to go open that church and to figure out how to, because it was so visible in a community with no power and no water, and let people know it was open and start to care for people and figure it out. What was great about it is I knew it was the right thing to do. I had kids, we had dogs, it was a problem, how we were going to figure out how to do this and get to the church. We really didn't have any stuff to give away, so there's actually not much help we could actually do, which is always when you know you've hit it, like you know you're at the right spot. So I sent I think I literally sent put two Facebook posts up to friends in New York who were in parts of New York who had power, and said, I'm going to open the door. I'm going to get to St. Mark's, I'm going to open the door, I'm going to be there till it gets dark. And we only have what we have left in our food pantry. We had a really small food pantry. And so we did it, and as soon as I didn't think about it when I did it, what all the implications could be, of course. I thought about it later, when it was too late to stop it.
Right.
And that people could actually show up. There are high-rises around us. How much stuff do we have? It could be a problem. And so I thought it would take about 45 minutes to empty out our food pantry, and another 30 minutes to apologize for not having more, and then we'd go home. But people would know we were there, we did the best we could, we gave out everything we had. I think we were there for 2 or 3 days, because these SUVs of people, who from all over the city came and dropped off things and helped us run them up stairs and elevators, in buildings where elevators weren't working. The city council person sent their staff over because they didn't have anything to distribute anymore. The National Guard sent their stuff over because they couldn't get people to come to the National Guard drop-off site. So literally, I did nothing. I did no coordinating, I did no planning, we had no staff. People called us thinking that we had received a grant to see if they could, literally, when the...
You had.
Right, that we had received so that they could be employed by. I mean, it was hilarious. The church response was, "Can we get a little bit of what you have?"
Wow.
But our response was, the building acted as the church, and people did what you expected. They brought what they wanted. They brought their ability to help, and they brought their need.
Yeah.
And the impact was, we acted like the church. I acted like a priest responsible for that community. And the parishioners started to act like people that could be responsible for their community. They would never have known it if we had, again, negotiated what we should have. We could never have talked our way there. But we started to enact it.
It's beautiful.
Orthopraxy.
That's what they call that, right? Yeah. It meant we had no candles at Christmas. Whatever.
One of the things that seems to be frequently a false dichotomy in our congregations is this idea that to maintain the system, to maintain operations, we have to somehow sacrifice being on mission. But that doesn't seem to be what you all are advocating here. It seems like in everything you're talking about that there's a sense of vitality found in actually wedding those things together, that the life of a congregation and the maintaining a worshiping community it somehow has to be integrated with this idea of being on mission and paying attention to our neighbors and building those partnerships. Say some more about that. Would you say that's true, that's which...
I would say that balance is necessary to be fed and then work it out, and it's necessary to the vitality of the church. In my context, again, in Southern California, the church is honestly on the decline, and there's parts of our denomination that are still thriving. But maybe the Diocese of Los Angeles is 10 years ahead, and get prepared because it's going to happen too. So if you want to be vital, get out there and have your beautiful worship space and the beautiful family that you are as a parish, but make a difference. It's necessary going forward. I feel that so deeply.
A couple of things I heard earlier on. One is the thing about saying yes, which which you did with your Facebook post or whatever, and I've, in my parish experience, have just agreed to do stuff, not really knowing how you'd ever get it done. Being willing to fail, which I don't know about you, I was not trained in seminary to fail. No one said this is a good idea, but actually it is. It's to be encouraged, to try stuff. And our friend Carol Anderson often, who's a mentor in my life in parish ministry, often says, well, what's the one thing that you can't do without God's help? And pray about that, because that's probably where you're being called in parish ministry, to do that thing that you are so clear that you're never going to be able to do this on your own, and gets at the hubris that often attaches to clerical life. It's a really good antidote to that.
I think one of the blessings of coming into ministry right now, one of the great gifts of this time, is even if you go into a big, comfortable place like I am, where there's lots of resource, it's pretty clear, at least in the literature, that that's over. So you don't have to build yourself up for that career anymore. You can if that's really your dream. God bless you. You can do that. But you don't have to. And it used to be that it was really unsensible to do anything else. There's not a lot of that left in the church. So it means that we get to actually be the church. And even a lot of the big institutions are kind of desperate to be the church and to not mirror successful corporate life or successful nonprofit life. And it's a real gift. That wasn't the case 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So to not have to fake it from the beginning, because I don't think people go into this work anymore wanting that life. And if you do, that's a lot of personal work to get to for most of us. Like most of us, it's not right up front. If that is really what you want, then you should do that work and figure it out if that's what you want, because it's not a lot of who we are anymore. But the gift is we actually get to do the thing that is church. We get to be in mission all the time. We get to be risk-taking. People are less afraid to fail, which comes from Silicon Valley for most of us. And I went to Union, so I was thinking I wasn't trained to fail, but I was trained to risk a lot, and I was trained to be misunderstood by a congregation. They were wrong about that. But there was a sense that you were supposed to lead. And you could be really wrong in that, and that would be okay, and you could apologize and you do something else. But that's very much about where I went to school. But it assumed that the voice of the gospel was out in the community, and the site of the gospel was the community, which I'll talk about tomorrow, and the places that don't need healing or don't need the gospel. And so, of course, that's us, all of us inside being fed, but a lot of places don't have a lot of awareness around that. So you can go out in search of what needs healing, and that's where I think that's where we figure out how to read the gospel.
It seems to me that it's in our potential ministries across the church that we identify more as Americans with this courage and can-do spirit, just masking this great big ball of fear underneath. Like, do it right, or don't do it at all. Whether instead of identifying maybe as Christians, that might be like a little bit of fear masking this great big ball of hope underneath, you know, and just stepping out into with faith in. I have to learn this over and over again, and I enjoy learning it, but I wish it would just stick sometimes. That the Spirit will make a way if I just move my feet. I've not been let down.
Yeah.
You know.
Is there a call story in the Bible that doesn't have some element of be not afraid?
Yeah, because it's terrifying.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
I used to ride my bike across town to St. Mark's when I was preaching, because because the gospel calls us to things that are terrifying, and it is terrifying to ride your bicycle through the traffic in Manhattan. And so that I was really connected to fear before I went out and talked about fear as though it was an abstract idea. I could come to you with like a war story, basically, of having made it across town.
Right.
And I think it's actually really important to stay connected to how afraid we are all the time, because we are. It's just the truth of our living. And you're right, we're not in a culture where that's a good, but life is really scary.
Well, thank you to each of you for the risks that you have taken and the gifts that you have brought to the church. We're all grateful for the leadership and the adventures that you've taken us all on in your ministries. So thank you. Can we thank our guests?